It is day 240 of the October 7th war. Israel is now in an intense period of negotiations that, if successful, will result in the freeing of the hostages from the Hamas terror dungeons in Gaza. On Friday, President Biden presented what he said was an Israeli proposal for freeing the hostages and ending the war that Hamas started on October 7th. The proposal has three phases: Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Phase 1 will last 6 weeks. This is what will happen in Phase 1, according to President Biden. Israel and Hamas will cease fire. The guns will go quiet. Israel will withdraw from populated areas of Gaza. This means a withdrawal from the cities, but not other key points on the borders. Hamas will release a number of living hostages: women, the elderly, the wounded. We don't know how many at this stage. Hamas will also release some bodies of dead hostages for burial in Israel and closure for their families. Palestinian civilians, and here President Biden emphasized he was talking about civilians and not Hamas terrorists, can return to their homes in all areas of Gaza. What this will mean in practice is that Israel will monitor the movement of people returning from southern to northern Gaza and prevent Hamas terrorists from returning and rebuilding their strongholds there. Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. The exact number and the offenses for which they are in prison have not been stated. Israel will also continue to flood Gaza with aid. President Biden spoke of a record 600 trucks going into Gaza every single day. Now, that's not an Israeli concession. It is, in fact, Israel's policy to allow all aid into Gaza as much as the UN and other organizations can send and distribute in the Gaza Strip. Now, all of these things, if Hamas says yes, will happen in a 6-week period that is Phase 1. During this time, Israel and Hamas, through their mediators, will negotiate the details of Phase 2. Here's where it gets tricky. Phase 2 involves the release of all remaining living hostages, including male IDF soldiers. Hamas is demanding the release of mass murderers from Israeli prisons. In exchange, President Biden did not specify how many. Also in Phase 2, Biden said Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza. He said if Hamas sticks to the deal, the ceasefire from Phase 1 will lead to a cessation of hostilities permanently. In other words, Phase 2 means the end of the October 7th war in Gaza. Then the parties move to Phase 3. Phase 3 is a major reconstruction plan for Gaza, led by Arab nations and the international community, together with Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Biden said Hamas must not be allowed to rearm. And all the concrete that went into Gaza after the last war, a decade ago, that went into the tunnels under people's homes, will have to go to people's homes for real this time. Only in this stage will we get all of the dead hostages back. And let's remember, at least 39 of the hostages still trapped in Gaza have been killed, and Hamas is holding onto their bodies. But Hamas has never confirmed exactly whom it's holding, how many, and we don't know exactly who is alive, who is dead, or how many. After President Biden's speech, the Israeli Prime Minister's office responded. It insisted that Israel will not end the war before its 3 goals are met, the same goals it's been saying from the beginning: the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities, the release of all the hostages, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Those are Israel's stated conditions for a permanent ceasefire, and Israel is saying the idea of a permanent ceasefire before that is a non-starter. The Israeli people are asking many questions. President Biden said his vision for a durable end to the war creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power. But how is the Hamas rapist regime going to be removed from power? That's not clear. Biden said that Israel has the right to bring those responsible for October 7th to justice. But how is it possible to bring the Hamas rapist regime's leaders to justice if Israel agrees to a permanent ceasefire? That's not clear. How is it possible to prevent the Hamas rapist regime from rearming if the IDF completely withdraws from Gaza? That's not clear. What role are Arab nations and the international community willing to play in ensuring that Gaza never again threatens Israel? That's not clear. Finally, apart from President Biden's proposal, is there any other way that we can get those poor hostages out of the Hamas terror dungeons? That's also not clear. But what we know now is that Israel's proposal is on the table and the United States stands behind it. Egypt and Qatar are telling Hamas to take the deal. And we need maximum international pressure on the Hamas rapist regime to say yes, or the war that Hamas started will intensify until Hamas ends. The Israeli people want this war to end already. We're paying a terrible price for it with dead soldiers. But they want this war to end with the hostages home and Hamas never again able to terrorize our citizens. Because we know, after countless rounds of fighting with Hamas in Gaza, that if Hamas is not destroyed, there will be a next time, and it will be worse. Hamas exists for the sake of war, for the sake of peace. It must go. And so even if we're talking about ending this horrific war that Hamas launched with the October 7th massacre, that doesn't mean there will be peace, unfortunately. Because Hamas exists for the sake of destroying Israel, and they vowed to do October 7th again and again until Israel is destroyed, and even if their military power is degraded, they're not suddenly going to embrace peace with Israel. They want an Islamic caliphate instead of Israel. And the idea of a permanent ceasefire with Hamas is an insult to Hamas and its leaders' intelligence. Everyone knows that a permanent ceasefire with Hamas is not a real thing that can happen. Hamas's core ideology, the reason for its popularity, is the violent destruction of Israel, from the river to the sea and possibly beyond. There cannot be permanent coexistence with Hamas, because Hamas's stated goal is the destruction of Israel and the annihilation of the Jewish people. We'll take some questions from our audience watching on the live stream. A reminder that we're live on all major social media platforms, especially YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and we'll take any questions you have before the broadcast and during the briefing. Yes, first questions, please.
We have a number of questions today. This one is from Matan on our live Instagram feed. He writes, question, are people in Israel leaning more towards the Biden ceasefire hostage deal now or more towards continuing the war? It's important for us keyboard warriors to know what the majority wants.
That's an excellent question. Look, Israel faces an impossible dilemma right now. It wants to bring back the hostages, and it wants to make sure that Hamas can never again take people hostage again. It's torn between destroying sheer pure evil and rescuing our people from sheer pure evil. Now, Israel's position has been all along, we'll do both. And not only will we do both, but putting military pressure on Hamas will make a hostage release deal more likely. But this, the plan that President Biden proposed, is the Israeli proposal. The hostages' families rallied in Tel Aviv last night, calling it the Netanyahu deal. Now, as I said in the briefing, there are many unresolved questions about how exactly Israel is supposed to achieve the three goals it stated as conditions for a permanent ceasefire, if indeed we're moving towards a ceasefire with Hamas still standing on its feet. But in order to get Hamas to accept a deal to bring back the hostages who need to come home, we need maximum pressure on Hamas until then. Military pressure that Israel is putting on them, and international diplomatic pressure to give Hamas a reason to say yes to the deal. Because right now it doesn't look like Hamas is interested in any deal at all. It wants this war to drag on because it is a genocidal, psychopathic death cult. And it doesn't care how many of its own civilians get killed along the way. So we need international pressure on Hamas to accept the deal that Israel has proposed, that the US is behind, and that even Egypt and Qatar are now pressuring it to accept.
Avraham on Twitter asks, if Israel is committed to finishing off Hamas in Gaza, why aren't they committed to do the same in the West Bank?
Avraham, that's an excellent question. Israel knows that Hamas is intensely popular in the West Bank. And it's intensely popular because although it's done a terrible job of governing Gaza since 2007, its core ideology of the violent destruction of Israel from the river to the sea is actually a very faithful reflection of the Palestinian ethos. A poll conducted in the West Bank asked Palestinians, do you think the October 7th massacre was legitimate or illegitimate? Do you know how many West Bank Palestinians said it was illegitimate? Zero. Literally 0%. And so Israel is committed to destroying Hamas in Gaza, not only so that it can never pose a threat to Israel from Gaza again, but because if this war ends with Hamas somehow able to declare victory, that will only boost its popularity in the West Bank, where people will see that it took on Israel and emerged unscathed, and that Israel wasn't able to defeat it. That is why Israel is committed, and the US is committed as well, in the words of the White House, to the enduring defeat of Hamas. We've seen arrests inside the West Bank of Hamas leaders. There have been very serious raids, but you make a very important point. This is not a local war between Israel and a Palestinian terror group in Gaza. It is a war that Hamas and its proxies have declared on Israel on 7 different fronts. We're under attack on 7 fronts: Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Iran. And even if this war ends in Gaza, that is still going to leave us surrounded with Iranian proxies on the other fronts that are going to have to be dealt with. And the challenge of Hamas trying to provoke and incite terrorism and an armed rebellion inside the West Bank is a challenge that Israel is going to have to face, whatever happens in Gaza. But certainly the destruction of Hamas's governing and military capabilities in Gaza will dampen its efforts to sow chaos in the West Bank too.
This question is from Adam on Twitter. He writes, given the ongoing situation in northern Israel and the latest barrage of missiles from Hezbollah, is there any intention by the Israeli security forces to enter southern Lebanon once Hamas has been defeated in Gaza and the hostages brought home?
That's an excellent question. The Northern Front has been overlooked internationally. People are focusing on Gaza. They forget that Israel is fighting a fully fledged war with Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy army, in Lebanon. It joined the war on October 8th. It's been firing thousands of rockets at Israel. It's displaced tens of thousands of Israelis who cannot go back to their homes. In many cases, their homes have been shelled. Now, President Biden, in his speech on Friday, said that he hopes that this potential ceasefire in Gaza will help to get a ceasefire in the north as well. But Israel needs Hezbollah to back away. We cannot take the risk of a repeat October 7th along the northern border. And so, yes, even if this war in Gaza ends, however it ends, that still leaves unresolved the question of a much larger war in the north, a war with an Iranian proxy army that, as viewers of the State of a Nation podcast will remember, has the 8th largest missile arsenal in the world. And even if that's solved, Israel is going to have to confront the fact that the most powerful military around is sitting right on its borders in Lebanon, back to the teeth by Iran, with the same goal as Hamas of destroying the state of Israel.
Rebecca on Instagram asks a simple question. What about destroying the tunnels?
Rebecca, that's an excellent question. Throughout the war, Israel has been focusing on destroying the Hamas tunnels. Now, the tunnels stretch not only inside Gaza, but out of Gaza. So far, we've found at least 20 tunnels from Gaza going into Egypt. That's why the operation in Rafah was so important for Israel, to take over the border between Egypt and Gaza and clamp down on the tunnels that will otherwise allow Hamas to rearm and smuggle more rockets into the Gaza Strip. Now, in Gaza, we've seen Israel's latest estimates are a tunnel network of around 500 kilometers. That's huge, considering that Gaza is only 25 miles from top to bottom. It's 1.5 times the length of the New York subway. And Israel has destroyed large parts of it. By the way, that's why you see so much of the destruction above ground, because of the need to destroy this military infrastructure deliberately embedded under civilian areas. Israel hasn't destroyed all of it, but wherever it can, its engineering forces are neutralizing that city of Gaza underground in the hope that when this war ends, and there is reconstruction in Gaza as per phase 3 of the Biden plan, we'll see concrete going to people's houses above ground and not into those tunnels. That military necropolis under Gaza must never be rebuilt, because otherwise it's a guarantee of another war.
Hillary on Instagram asks, what will happen with UNRWA in this deal?
Hillary, an excellent question. UNRWA is a Hamas front. It is an organization that exists to advance the Palestinians' goal of the elimination of Israel from the river to the sea. It employs vast numbers of Hamas terrorists with no accountability. It allows Hamas to leach electricity from its main offices to its server farm underground. It allows Hamas to operate out of its schools and facilities inside Gaza. It allows Hamas to hijack aid, and it covers it up. UNRWA is a Hamas front. It is an integral part of Hamas's military operations. That's why many people in Israel will go as far as to call UNRWA itself a terrorist organization. Now, since the start of this war, we in Israel have been warning that if we want a sustainable ceasefire after this war, it's not enough to destroy Hamas. It's not enough to demilitarize Gaza. You need to de-radicalize Palestinian society. We need the world to realize the damage they have done by funding this so-called refugee agency and teaching Palestinian children that they're refugees, that Gaza isn't their real home, that their job is to destroy Israel and become terrorists and martyrs. And if this war ends with UNRWA still in Gaza, still educating Palestinian children with that destructive narrative that doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist, then maybe Hamas will be gone, but the violent ideology that sustained it will still be there, and the next terror organization will arise. And if we want a sustainable ceasefire inside Gaza, we need the world to take seriously the task of de-radicalizing Palestinian children, making sure the next generation isn't brought up on jihad, and that means there can be no room for UNRWA in a post-war Gaza. Unfortunately, by the way, I think UNRWA's biggest European donor is Norway, the same Norway that last week recognized a Palestinian state as a reward for October 7th, incentivizing the next October 7th attack, and still had the chutzpah to claim that it was a step against Hamas. So clearly many of our allies around the world have a lot of work to do to understand the damage that their policies, supposedly humanitarian policies, have done in fueling extremism in this region.
Our last question comes from the Instagram live stream from Marcel. He asks, what government body would be in Gaza if Hamas is defeated, and what actions would be taken to prevent further attacks from Gaza?
Israel has not laid out a plan for the day after Hamas. That is one of the major sticking points, not only between Israel and its allies, but within the Israeli government. That's why War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz from the National Unity Party is threatening to walk out of the Emergency National Unity Coalition by June 8th if Israel doesn't present a plan for who should govern the day after, who should govern Gaza the day after. Israel is saying it definitely won't be us, but it also definitely won't be Hamas. Ideally, we would have some coalition of Arab states and the international community, a trusteeship kind of system to govern the Gaza Strip. Israel wanted for a while Palestinian clans inside Gaza who aren't connected to Hamas to be able to govern the Gaza Strip. A horrific report in the British press today about someone who was executed by Hamas because Israel was talking to him about maybe taking over the running of Gaza. But if one thing is clear, Israel will not govern the Gaza Strip when this war is over, and neither will Hamas. Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much, everyone. We will be back tomorrow as well, 3 p.m. Israel time, 8 a.m. Eastern time for a daily briefing on all the major social media platforms. Please follow us, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, everywhere. Follow us, share it with your friends. We hope that this is giving you the information and the tools that you need to make Israel's case in the wider world. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Dejobnik signing off.